All right, Dave Jenkins back with you. Got Eddie Mercado here. Going to go with our IPDP planning. Just a few things we'll go over. A couple of areas I noticed that I made note on our planning was how well you relate things to the different content areas, specifically with the programming that we saw, the math, getting even Eric Olson, the other math teacher, involved, the flexibility when I was in your classroom and seeing, students had questions, they needed this, and just your flexibility to change the lesson around. Students were engaged, they enjoyed it, use of technology, and then as always, I think you have high expectations. Some growth areas that I looked at, and I have this just for pretty much all of the teachers that I would work with, based on our new standards-based grading policy, which I know there's been some bumps on the roads for all the teachers going through that, but just always communicating with students, parents, and colleagues. So that's one thing I want to focus on with all the teachers that we're working with. And then one of the things you brought up that you wanted to look at was student backgrounds. You mentioned the girl that came from, being homeschooled, wasn't really involved with using a lot of technology, is familiar with it. So those are just some areas that we'll look at as we go through here. But let's get to your side of it. What did you notice about the last year in your classroom that's been successful?
You mentioned that flexibility component. That's been hugely important. We've got students that, how do I want to put this? That very uncomfortable with open-ended problem solving. They want to know, how do I get my A? And when there's ambiguity thrown into that process, it sends them into, a panic. And so I feel like one of the things that I'm trying to accomplish with the things that I'm doing with students is to create comfort and familiarity with open-ended problem solving, and to ultimately give students some tools to learn how to deal with ambiguity when it rears its ugly head.
Almost some of that being comfortable with being uncomfortable type
Right,
stuff.
exactly.
So,
Yeah, good way to put that.
is there a lesson that you've taught in this past year that really sticks out to you at all?
The very first lesson in that the course that you observed in our robotics class, which we're going to call an engineering design class, that initial lesson required the students to journal after going out and doing some learning, and it really struck me just how difficult that was for the kids, because I didn't give them guidance about what a journal looks like. And I chose to do that because I don't want them to think that there's only one way to approach journaling, that ultimately it's a story and I require certain kind of visual elements. And this particular group of students was all freshmen, which is kind of new to me in that class. So I clearly did not set up my expectations very well, and that had a big impact on the first round of assessments, because people just didn't really know what I was looking for, and if I'd have maybe done some things differently with how I rolled out those expectations, I think I would have seen a little less anxiety from the kids.
What are some of the areas that you teach that really excite you as a teacher?
I'm a photographer, so when I teach class in multimedia, I have no way to know whether students are going to try to, get into video, get into sound, get into photography. But when I find that poor soul that's interested in picking up a camera, I'm usually like, I really love watching people get better at using that particular tool, because I remember what it was like for me to have to learn how to use that tool, that I was using film. Digital is so much easier until you get to the processing component, and then it's just as complicated as being in a dark room, because you've got software that's trying to do the same thing. So that's probably my favorite. I really enjoy teaching photography.
Probably a little bit of information overload at that point.
Yeah, it is
too.
really. And between the controls on the camera and the controls on the software, it is very overwhelming to learners.
What are some areas that maybe you don't necessarily dread teaching, but aren't as exciting, or maybe they trouble you a little bit?
I facilitate open-ended foreign language independent studies. And the thing that I dread the most about that is the difference between the kids that are doing it for a requirement. I want to get 4 years of a foreign language so I don't have to take it in college. That kind of thing. I'll need 2 years to get into the University of Iowa or something like that, right? And then there's the kid that I want to learn German or I want to learn Portuguese. Those are the kids I want to work with. And the other students, it feels, I didn't sign on to be a dentist. I don't want to pull teeth.
Yeah.
And, if they aren't passionate, if they're just trying to accomplish some academic requirement, it's just that I really struggle with. And trying to get them to transition to looking at it as, something that's going to benefit them outside of their documentation. Like, here's my transcript. This is me. There's some students that refuse to let go of that. They just don't. I mean, you could be
their
bilingual.
identity. Yeah.
Forget about that paper.
Yeah.
Can you communicate in this? If you got an A in that class, that's great. But nobody gives a shit if you can't speak the language.
Yeah.
And they just don't necessarily buy in. They know what they need out of their academic experience. They want it with a minimal amount of input. I work with tag kids. I'm not interested in minimal input.
Yeah.
So that's hard for me to wrap my heads around sometimes.
All right. Well, you said that one of your professional growth areas was that you wanted to get a master's degree in STEM ed. How will this goal be beneficial to you in the classroom?
Well, two things that are that come to the top of my head. First of all, I found out that by completing this classwork, I'm actually going to be one methods class away from a biology endorsement. Because my background in the undergrad was in biology, but I didn't know that I wanted to teach until much later and went back and became a non-traditional student. So that is pretty exciting. The idea that there could be a whole new area of content opened up to me professionally someday, and I love biology. So that'd be a really nice fit for some of the things that I enjoy on a personal level. Maybe, a biology elective like genetics or something like that. That could be really, really fun. But the second thing, I'm learning a lot about how important STEM is as a process. Most people understand what the acronym stands for: science, technology, engineering, math, all that stuff. And in our school, and you could probably attest to this to a certain extent, our STEM program is science classes plus math classes plus, and that's not what STEM is. STEM's supposed to be a process, and that process is hugely beneficial to students of all types, but especially tag students. So I feel like I'm learning how to take that STEM process and apply it to a wide range of content areas.
Okay. Next question, are there any other options to reach this goal? Obviously,
There's some other certifications, but no online options that I'm aware of. So that's what really drew me to the U of I's program. I don't have to drive anywhere.
Okay. Do you think, is there anything you could have done to increase student learning or motivation throughout this year?
Definitely. The biggest issue I've seen with motivation is students' lack of understanding of my expectations for certain open-ended assignments. Specifically, when I ask students to journal, I think I need to break down what just one individual entry should look like and include, as opposed to, when you're done with this product, it's going to have these elements. That was too ambiguous for students. Another way that I think that manifested in my classes this year is I've seen some students that thought they were taking one kind of class, and then once they got into it, they came to realize, whoa, I can't handle this stuff. You're telling me I can do anything I want, but I don't know what I want to do. That's your job. And, they just, again, it was that open-endedness that led them to become disconnected from the work. And ultimately, I actually had 2 students drop 2 of my classes.
So maybe something we need to work with a counselor on as well.
Just so that there's some better communication. I've also made adjustments to what the course guide was saying, I just reevaluated all of that data that we've put out for students, so I'm hoping that'll also help with that somewhat.
Okay. Are there any strategies you've used this year that you'll continue to use? I mean, you mentioned the journaling.
Yeah, journaling is really important because I feel that reflective component helps the students understand what they've accomplished, and it holds them accountable. It's one thing to learn something, it's another thing to be able to describe that learning, and that's very metacognitive. And I think the more times that we can get students involved in that kind of work, the more they can benefit from it.
Is there any strategies maybe you've picked up in your master's classes that you're currently taking that you want to try to implement?
Content integration. I like, for example, I'm starting to realize that there's value to talking about science in a language arts class, and I see value in bringing math into a science class, and I see value of bringing biology into a physical education class. So I'm beginning to realize that the more interlinkage we can create in a content, then that it's going to be less likely for a student to walk into a math lesson and think this has no relevance to me, unless I'm going to be a math teacher. If we can start integrating content a little bit more effectively, I'm hoping that students will see value to all the things that we're offering them.
Do you envision, or what do you think is the first step in that process?
We were just talking about that actually at our PD meeting, and I think the first step in the process is to create a K-12 articulation of some kind as to what this looks like on a program level. We're going to need to involve our curriculum director or assistant superintendent and see if Mrs. Vance would be willing to sort of support this push towards integration, to possibly think about some other content areas that we haven't really touched upon, and to maybe even reevaluate how we're structuring certain classes, like the next gen science standards, for example. They don't have strictly physics or strictly chemistry standards. They have the physical science standards, and it's all wrapped up. I'm wondering, should we be teaching a class called the physical sciences? And instead of waiting for that senior year to be like, now you are ready for physics, we could be teaching that to ninth graders.
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason a ninth grader can't wrap their head around gravity.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking maybe there's some changes that we could make on a program level that might lead to different ways to deliver content.
All right. Well, I think we've kind of gone over everything from your side. Like I said, I touched on quite a few things. I think you're doing really well in the classroom. A couple of things we can work on. I'll make sure to get you a copy of all this, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, all right. Thanks
All
for
right,
giving me the chance.